Okay, my name is TJ Sullivan. I am the Executive Director of the Superior Chamber of Commerce. And this month, July 2020, we have decided as a chamber to do some special focus on mental health, particularly as it relates to the COVID pandemic. Obviously, we're settling in a little bit to some of the restrictions and masks and different things that are part of the COVID landscape here in the United States right now. But one thing that we realize that we all need to be very concerned about is the mental health of our teams and ourselves as we lead our teams through this very difficult time, especially with school coming up and no one knowing whether kids are going back to school and different things. There's a lot on people's minds right now, even if it's just boredom. So we're so excited to have Heather Cook, who's going to speak to us today. Heather is a scientist, integrative systems thinker, and a navigator of the individual and collective human experience, combining her unique background in laboratory science, public health, emergency preparedness, and psychology. Heather fuses the art and science of exploration, discovery, and practical application. Her consulting company, HECO Consulting, which I want to say is HECO Consulting, but could be HECO Consulting. Heather's going to let me know. Heather's and her company are members of the Superior Chamber, and she offered to do this for us, and we're so grateful. So Heather, take it away.
Thank you, TJ. Well, thank you everybody for being here and being willing to engage in this topic. You know, when we talk about mental health and mental well-being, it's one that is of essential importance, but it's one that we all try to shy away from often because of certain preconceived notions and everything. I'm here to say that today, this is not all doom and gloom. Yes, there have been struggles and there are ongoing struggles with the current situation with COVID, as well as many other events happening in the world. But doom and gloom and it being bad is not the entire story, so we want to be sure to pay attention to that. For today is threefold. One, what do we mean by well-being and mental health, especially something that is going beyond, you know, there's a problem or lack of a problem, or is it about people's functionality or productivity? There's a broader, more expansive idea that I'd like to share. Second is to provide everybody with some practical tools for yourself and team. I know there are a lot of self-care ideas out there. The idea of different things you can do have been promoted and put out there on the internet quite a bit. But some other tools to actually engage with yourself and others. And then also to create some moments of reflection, to understand, hey, where am I coming from, my personal insights, as well as how do those impact my team and how I interact with my team and the approaches I take. All of this is under the umbrella to say, hey, is there a way to get through this? And not just weather the storm, push through, tolerate it, and just get by, but the possibility for, hey, even if things don't work out the way I want to, can I look back and say I did it well? Can my team, my people, my staff say, hey, you know what, in that difficult time, my company really took care of me. And then the possibility, the true possibility, not just a cliche, is the possibility of emerging stronger from all this there, and what would it take to move in that direction? All right. So the first thing to put out there is taking a moment to understand what mental health is. And the context that I use it is different than, like I said, there's a problem or an absence of a problem, which has historically been the way we've looked at well-being and mental health. The idea that, and I'm going to share this, the idea of what mental health is actually is up for debate, and there's a lot of different ideas and concepts, but I'm going to put one up on the screen right now, and I'll share that with everybody. Did that work? TJ, are we good with everybody can see that?
Yes, it's fine. It's fine.
Fantastic.
It's fine.
Okay, so this idea of going beyond just being able to cope and being fun in your daily life, idea that mental health is this ability to find some kind of internal equilibrium. Even when things come at you, we're going to get thrown off. We're going to have difficult experiences. We're going to have difficult emotions. How do we go ahead and meet the challenge? What do we have internally? Our ability to self-reflect, to be flexible, to cope. And it has to do as here, and I know you can all read this, so I'll let you do that. It has to do with our thoughts, our cognitive skills, our emotions. What do we feel at that level? But also our social skills, and very importantly, our relationships with others, whether it's personal, work, and relationship with the world, with communities, and global concepts and ideas. So it's really much more encompassing than what we typically think of as mental health. And fundamentally, I mean, mental health is the essence of everything we do. It's how we experience the world. It's how we feel. It's how we interact, how we go ahead and engage in the world. So taking that fully and considering that when we talk about what are we talking about with mental health in the workplace. So I thought I would go ahead and share my story of how I've come to this and why I wanted to offer this small moment of understanding that I am trained actually as a molecular biologist and have worked in labs in microbiology for years. And then I worked for the New York City Health Department in 2009. And during that time, as you all know, is about 10 years ago, we had a pandemic as well. Very different outcome, very different way it played out, but I was part of the response team then. And it was actually in that moment where I realized the importance that my brain switched from this much more rigid idea and maybe a little bit more of a black and white idea of what mental health is to the understanding of the importance of both individuals and collective, and that at the fundamental levels, our well-being is what matters the most. And it comes from that internal place, and then how we relate and interact with the world. So typically with disasters, this is an interesting thing that I thought I would share. With disasters, the idea of our phases is that, you know, we had something before the disaster happened. As you'll see here, there were some warnings and threats if we're going to relate this. And then it goes ahead, something happens. There's an impact, the initial impact. Typically, it's a single point event where a hurricane happens, an earthquake happens. And just at this moment, go ahead and, as you're looking at the graph, understand where you feel like we've been at, where you personally have been at, and where we have been as a community, and whether that's a local community or a country, as a nation, and then also globally, is that there's this impact. And during the impact phase, there are a lot of responses. And if you look back 3-4 months ago, there was anxiety. There's still some anxiety, the grief, the loss, the confusion, the disorientation of what's actually happening and going on. The shock and the surprise, because we had a sudden onset, even though there was some warning and threat. And then there was this big rally. If you think about it, on this graph, it's called the honeymoon phase. So it was like, we're in this together, we can do this. Everybody is kind of this call to action. There's something coming up and I'm ready to step up and engage. And then over time, as you'll see, is that the energy gets lost. The ongoing fatigue, the demands, where is this going, what is going to happen? As you see, we call it disillusionment. And then it goes down, and then we find a way to actually come to terms and work through the grief. And then over time, we have our ups and downs, but there's an idea of moving into something new. This is how we usually approach when we have these disasters. This is the typical cycle. However, with a pandemic, it's a little bit different. Right here, if you look at this, it's different in the sense that we go ahead and we don't get to start to go on the upclimb because we're having an ongoing experience of potential threats. And the threats can be anywhere from economic to health to cohesion of your social contacts. And so there's going to be this up and down of where you personally are at and the folks around you are at. that are going to influence where you find yourself on this graph. And it can change day to day, month to month, hour to hour. So keeping this in mind, it's really important to go ahead and pull back and go ahead and look at the whole big picture, knowing that there will be an endpoint, even if it doesn't feel like that right now. And that lack, there are two things that are different that are important to acknowledge. The lack of the event being over. It wasn't a single point event. It's ongoing with no end in sight that we know. We can predict, hope for, we can imagine one, but there is no definite end in sight for how life's going to be and the potential for it getting worse. And secondly, this is the one event in the world where absolutely everybody is impacted. There is no one to kind of catch us, to say, oh, you know what, you're having a hard time. It wasn't difficult for me. I can come in and help out. That sense of security that other people can catch it, that can hold the space, is a little bit shaken. Not that it's not possible, but it's shaken right now. So from that perspective, we're talking about what it can go ahead and look like at the collective level. So I wanted to put that out there, that we are going through several phases. So the idea of mental health, it's going to shift. And it's going to shift throughout the event, how it's been and how we're moving forward. And keeping that in mind and being aware of where you're at and then assessing where your team is at is quite important.
Heather, I have a question for you at this point. Isn't it somewhat, as I was looking at that graph, I was thinking, my God, it feels like that bottom dip is kind of extending, because we don't know when the heck something's going to get better. You know, it's not like with a hurricane, we're like, okay, we've cleaned everything up and now we can start rebuilding, right? This still feels like, you know, the numbers are up and they're down and they're up and they're down, and a surge is coming, and, you know, school might be closed again. I mean, it seems like the bottom part is more extended. Is that a fair statement?
The bottom part is more extended. I would say it's more extended if we look at it like both, it goes lower in the graph, right? We're going to possibly go lower and go up. And sometimes the ups and the downs are harder for some people. Believe it, even if it's a positive up, the going up and down is a lot of stress on people's systems, because there isn't, and that's the uncertainty part here.
And clearly, you know, minority communities are suffering more right now than others. So there might be a cultural element to it too.
Absolutely. The cultural element, and the part that this graph that I was showing is missing is it doesn't look at where you were before COVID, where you were before all the social justice movements. So if you were struggling then, you might be actually compounded. It might be a compounded effect. For some people, it's possible that things were hard, and that, interestingly enough, this shift of life, of what's happening, was a pause in having to respond to their everyday life. There was some relief, there was some slowing down, and there's some reassessment of what do I really want out of life. So that's concurrently happening at the same time. So again, there's these struggles, the difficulties, that it's so multifaceted what contributes to it at the collective level. And then I'll go ahead and talk about the individual level as well. And the uncertainty that this graph, we don't know when it goes back up. Absolutely. So then, if we go ahead, and that was a collective snapshot. If back to here. So we have this idea, and this is only one version of how to look at our own stress responses and stress system. So in general, if you look here, there's this graph, and I know there's a lot on there, this is our zone, and we each have a zone of saying, hey, I feel like I can do this. And it's a genuine feeling of, okay, even if stuff is happening, I feel like I can handle this, I can manage it. There's an integration between thoughts and feelings and actions. There's a sense of feeling, I'm okay, it's okay, the world is okay. And then we can go outside these zones. So the upper zone, we call it hyperarousal. And the reason why is that there's just a lot of energy going on. Some people know it as fight or flight response. Anxiety happens here, overwhelming feelings of go, 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 go. It's not okay, that very speedy feeling, tension, and such. And then other people have other reactions where they go to the hyperarousal zone, where it's, hey, you know what? This was so much. I just am going to shut down. I have no energy. I can't go there. Shut off and numb. So it's important to know where you go in response. We all have a favorite go-to. Some people are more of, I'm going to fight, I'm going to get out of here. Other people, hey, I'm just going to pretend this isn't happening and freeze. Um, so knowing your own response is important to say, hey, you know what? Even if I can't identify what is wrong right now, there's an indicator, and here are the signs that you can see that something's going on, that there's an overwhelm in my system that needs to be attended to. What humans are really, really good at doing is overriding this and just keep pushing through and keep going. So if you look here, kind of mapped out, we have feelings. So the idea of having a feeling of sad, of angry, of upset, that doesn't mean that there's something wrong. That is an important part of the human experience, to have a full spectrum of feelings and experiences, thoughts, emotions. And we go through them as long as we can say, hey, ups and downs, up and down. But when you start to get higher up and you cross over when things are too much, that's where the anxiety happens. And then you go ahead and, like a circuit breaker in the house, as a way to protect, you shut down. In terms of thinking about your team and your staff, think through the people that you have. What are their particular ways of responding to stress? Do they argue with you and fight back no matter what? Do they pretend and avoid that something is not happening? Go ahead, and you are going to want to take some time to scan the members of your team to say, where are they at and what can I observe over time to say, hey, are they having a hard time? Is there something that needs to be attended to? The thing that happens, however, with ongoing stress, if you don't have a lot of capacity or resources to come and support you, is that you'll see here, instead of having this from the 2 black lines, your window of tolerance gets smaller. So you'll see people getting more agitated, or you ask them to do one task and they're already shutting down. So paying attention to that, because ongoing stress will go ahead and cause a squashing of our zone of resilience. So this is the individual level. All right. And then when we talk about stressors right now, we have a whole bunch of stressors. I don't need to go through them all, but you do need to understand what is happening for you and what is happening for your staff. So home life, we know if people have kids, what does schooling look like? What do jobs look like? How people have responded to social distancing, quarantine, the possibility of quarantine again, or what we call collectively shutdown, the changes at work, the financial aspect. Remember, finances, if the economy is not okay and we don't feel safe and secure, we go into a threat response on an ongoing basis. Collective stress, which very much includes what's falling under Black Lives Matter and also other minority issues, and then the health concerns about the virus. So I'm going to take a moment there because I just downloaded a lot of information to everybody and want to take a pause and see if there's any thoughts, questions at this point, with an understanding of 2 frameworks of how we respond to stressful situations.
I will jump in again. I think a stressor that I'm experiencing a lot is just this sense of not knowing what I'm supposed to do for routine activities that I just did automatically before. I mean, even just going to your favorite store, or how do I get into the storage unit? What do I have to do? How do I, just a lot of things that I just did automatically and didn't have to think about. Now I have to think about how to do them differently, and I don't feel like I know what I'm supposed to do all the time, and that's very stressful. And I would think in a workplace it's the same thing. Like if I don't know how I'm supposed to interact with my fellow employees, I don't know how I'm supposed to go get the equipment to do my job, those kind of things, that can be very stressful, right?
Yes, and don't undermine the small stresses that add up. Um, so you'll have a lot of people say, I'm okay, I'm fine. And in a way, it's like, yes, they're functioning, but there's still this underlying stress that happens on a regular basis for things that people are like, well, the common response is that's not that big of a deal. Well, of all the things to worry about, why is that? And to honor that it is a difficult, stressful thing, even if it's can be classified as a minor stress, is having an impact on your system or someone else's system. If that's one of the few things you take away, is respecting and honoring that it shows up different ways for all of us. It's kind of, what's the straw that broke the camel's back? What's the thing that I can't, that was it. I can't handle it anymore. I lost it over that one thing. It's these things are adding up, kind of what you're saying, TJ. And then when we hit a critical mass, we tip over.
Yeah, a cumulative sort of effect. Greg was asking in the chat, what can we do to broaden our zone of resilience? And Greg, feel free to unmute if you want to be more specific on that. But yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks, TJ and Heather. Yeah, I appreciate the graph where you showed it shrinking. What can we do to stop it shrinking? And
so some of them are, we go back to the basics that we talk about, the idea of, are you eating well, sleeping, interacting with friends and family, which is not easy these days to do. So going back to some of the basics to build up what we call that resilience, those resilience factors. Exercising is a big one for people. And then also, it depends. Like for some people, mindfulness practices are great. Other people are like, gosh, that is so not my style. It depends on what's going on, and I'd want to make it specific. So if the reason why it's coming like this has to do with your ruminating thoughts, then we want to find an approach that addresses that. Like, how do you thought stop? And looking at ways to do that so that you have more space inside of you to say, okay, I can go ahead and contain those thoughts, put them over here, and move through my daily life in one way. So it depends on what is impacting your resilience getting smaller. And I think the assessment of that is really important, to take the time, like, why is this happening? Why is it getting squashed? Is step one. And then with the resilience is finding out what in general has always made you feel like, okay, you know what, that helps me keep going on. That helps me get some energized. So finding things that help energize you. To create a workplace that fosters resilience. I have that in about 5 or 10 minutes, getting to that, what you can do at the workplace to foster that. But in our daily life, for some people, it's often has to do with social interaction. So that is why this is such a difficult, how to build and open up your zone of resilience. One of the things we can talk about is from the public health perspective, is going ahead and the idea of who are you going to have contact with, being really clear. Who do you feel safe having in-person contact with and seeing them? Because that will bring you some re-energized state. So it depends on what it is that's impacting your resilience. If it's an economic reason why you feel stressed, then we have to address those from what resources are out there, what can be done. Because that's a huge one that feels threatening, and that our zone of resilience definitely comes down.
To your first point, Heather, I find for me and a lot of my friends, just putting down the damn phone and getting off social media and not tuning into the news so much can really help, with coping and resilience. It's like if you've got the, the CNN going in your break room 24/7, that might not be a good thing to help people with resilience, because they're just being bombarded constantly by negative news.
Something that I did early on, I had wanted for a couple of years to do one of those big canvas paint by numbers, but they take like 30 or 40 hours. I bought it and I am almost done, but it was a project that I would have never taken on because it's like that thing would live in my dining room or whatever for 5 years before I could get it done. But you know, when I'm feeling a little stressed, I spend a half an hour painting. And it was kind of like a little treat that I got because I had the time. And prior to that, I didn't want to take it on. So I gave myself an actual pleasure because of this situation, because I tackled something I wanted to do and didn't think was realistic.
And engaging in something that feels meaningful and purposeful and makes you have a sense of aliveness is really important, and staying away from the things that zap you of it. So like you were speaking, TJ, to the news. The other thing is, and I call it assessing, slowing down, pausing, and seeing, is going ahead and taking in, I know there's all these potential things that are going to go wrong, that things have been wrong, that haven't worked out, but right now, where is the okayness? And it's not about positive thinking necessarily. So I want to be clear about this. It's like, can I slow down and drop into, okay, what is actually working okay, instead of the bombarded or being bombarded with the negative or the difficult stuff. You also have to see it clearly, step back and see the full picture. That will build resilience as well. All right. I also, oh, here we go. So one of the questions to ask is, you know, what are beliefs about mental health in general, mental well-being? What has been your definition? I know I moved through that quickly at the beginning, but to take a moment, like, how do I look at mental health? And then what are the beliefs and possible biases you bring into the workplace that you would either say, hey, you know what, there's different responses. So one response can be, oh, mental health is super important across the board, no matter what, even at the workplace. Great, and I'm going to try to integrate it where I can. Or I'd love to, but I don't know how. Or I'd love to, but there are these other things that take precedent right now or at other times. Or is it, you know what, I think it's important, but you know, that the workplace is not the place that I'm supposed to address it. I maybe don't have that big of a responsibility to my team or my staff, or do I have a responsibility? And is that more from an ethical place, or the realization that people that are in a healthy mental state are going to work better? And if they work better, it's a positive cycle that you have happening. So taking a moment, and I'm happy for people to chime in what they have heard, what they believe, what others have shared with them about beliefs of mental health and mental well-being in the workplace. It's a tough one to talk about. I should name that. I haven't named that. That it's not an easy one to self-reflect on. And you also want to honor where you're at and be authentic with it and understand what your level of comfort is. But then also, by having that certain level of comfort, if it's like, hey, I'm not going to address it, what impact does it have on your staff? If you want to address it, your staff members might be like, whoa, 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 none of your business, back away. So finding that happy medium that meets your cultural and environmental needs of your workplace is important. And that moves me on to the idea of assessment and checking in with your staff. Go ahead and screen share. So here, the idea of checking in with your team, first you have to check in with yourself. Where am I at? What supports do I need? And understanding where you're at is fundamental. And we could spend, if people are interested, how do you do that? I work with people a lot on how do you understand where you're at yourself? But when you check in with your team, you have decisions to make. And how are you going to go about it? So when you say, how are you? And you get the, I'm okay, I'm fine, that's really not that helpful often if you think about it. It's like, what does that really mean? I'm just getting by, things are going great, I'm okay enough, I can function, but I feel somewhat dead inside, so I'm okay, I'm fine. Asking the question, how are you, doesn't get you far. In general, and then especially now because of the complexity of things that people are juggling. So my recommendation is to sit and think, how do I want to check in with my team? Is it checking in with my team individually? If I'm going to check in with them individually, is it a formal conversation or an informal conversation? Is it, I'm going to go ahead and say, I really want to check in, or are you just asking some questions to kind of get the pulse? A few ideas of how to ask, how are you, is add the word really at the end to that state of that question. How are you really? Now, people can decide how much they want to share with you. You sometimes want to ask the question that you really want answered. Like, I know it's been a lot for everybody, and I'm really trying to put something in place here that will help support you guys. Can you please share with me, what are your needs? I need to know so that I can go ahead and address them. You want to ask the question you need answered. Sometimes we need to be delicate with it, and then sometimes being straightforward. That has to do with personality, yours and your staff's. Watching how people are interacting with you, with others, and the work itself. So observing, are people moving slower than they typically are? And then asking, instead of judging it, is there anything I can do to support that? And then the idea of formal assessment. So that's in either surveys that you can send out and find out, or working with someone who does assessments. I know when I work with groups, being able to share something that is with someone from the outside can be helpful because of the concerns about saying it to their boss. So there can be an anonymous way. So really thinking about, how do I want to check in with my team, and what method, how often, and what does the check-in look like?
Heather, can you talk a little bit about whether it's good to do this one-on-one or in a group setting? So for example, we have a board member that whenever we get on a board call with 10 of us, wants to start off with, okay, everybody, let's go around and how are you doing? What's going on with you? Tell us something that's, like the whole group dynamic maybe gives people permission to share, but it also could be kind of uncomfortable or a big time suck. Can you talk a little bit about whether you think the group sharing is better, or is it one-on-one better?
Oh gosh, that is a big question to think through. There's benefits and drawbacks to both. You've already named some of them, TJ. One, it gives permission to people. When we share, the idea is we feel more connected to people. If we feel more connected to people and more, there's a cohesiveness, which makes us work better as a team. But other people walk in there and like, it's not my jam. I don't want to share how I'm doing. It's nobody's business, or, I'm not ready to talk about it. So my recommendation is, there's a time and place for the group work, but think about the question you're asking. Instead of saying, how are you doing? Ask a question, and I'm making this up, what has surprised you? Something that's a little bit more neutral, like, what has surprised you that you've noticed about the functioning of your company? What is the thing that you've been most curious about with regard to something? Or like, what's the funniest thing that you've found out about your family dynamics? So it doesn't always have to be serious to be able to give permission and sharing, and to still say, hey, I'm doing a check-in, to provide that sense of I'm interested and care about you. There will be people that are very much against, do not make me do this. And you want to have a way of being clear about what are the rules. Do they have to share or not share? Can they just say pass? Or is it mandatory that they say something? But when they say something and don't feel like it, are you creating a sense of pressure and authenticity? You're going to have to manage that, and then get feedback from people and real-time feedback, and then make adjustments for the next one. Like and what is the underlying need to do the check-in as a group? And if it's cohesiveness, then you can do it in other ways.
I just wanted to say that culturally, as a greeting, we say, "Hi, how are you?" And people, strangers, say it to you. And whenever I'm, having a rough time of it, I think to myself, one day I'm going to tell you. like, stop asking me. And so, "Hi, how are you?" is a commonplace greeting. So I don't think it's a way to ask a real question.
Yep. And we're so ready to move on. Like, I'm fine, or you don't even answer it. It feels rhetorical sometimes. So being guided about what is it that I really want to ask the person, and use the proper languaging. Take a moment to intentionally ask the question. Or, hey, and you have to be careful because everybody has a different response. I've noticed something and I wanted to check in with you. Or, you want to get it more specific. And then it also feels like, wow, you care. And the sense that someone feels like they genuinely care versus a, hey, how are you? And maybe I'm interested, maybe I'm not, I'm moving too fast, can make a difference. Also having the feedback, a way to put out there, and I talk about this later, the feedback with regard to, hey, if something comes up, how do they let you know? Being very clear and communicating that with people. If something, okay, things might be okay now, you're saying there's nothing you need, but if there is, I'm going to check in with you. I'm going to check in with everybody once a month or once a week. Putting it in place, what is going to be structural, and then, hey, if there's something that's going on, how do you come to me and tell me? And making a pathway, and not a protocol, but being clear about how they would approach you is important as well. There are a few other things that I want to share with everybody with regard to what do you do at the workplace. I know I've talked a little bit more about the framework and the more theoretical with a few, trying to screen share again, with a few practical ideas. I do want to share a few more practical ideas before we wrap up or leave time for a discussion. All right, so creating a sense of safety and security at the workplace. This is a huge topic. The idea of there's different types of safety and security components. One is physical safety, which you've probably addressed with regard to the virus. Emotional safety, which includes, hey, what's the feedback? How do I give feedback? What do I do if I don't feel safe working here? What is the process? We don't do well when there's an unknown. And helping people through the unknown can be helpful. And then incongruence. So one of the things that makes our brain say, hey, there's a threat, is when someone says one thing and means something else and you pick up on it. So when you think about this, what can you do to address these? Is the physical safety, is you have a plan in place. You go ahead and you create policies, and then you want to communicate this to your people, like, this is what we're doing. And if you choose to also explain why you came to that, great. Sometimes more information helps people. Other people don't need to know the why, they just want to know what. Emotional safety is all about communication. Are you going to, if something bad happens, are you going to be able to help me through it and take care of us? The unknown, you can plan for the unknown. We know some of the phases of what's likely to happen. So being able to plan and then communicate that to your team. So like, in the event this happens, this is how we would move forward. In the event the school shut down, this is how I plan on accommodating the fact that you might have children at home. Or here I'm going to help you go ahead and find a way for childcare. Being able to help and address the unknown helps our brains calm down and not be spinning out of control. And then also not being incongruence, which is a communication of this is what's true. It doesn't mean you have to share everything, but being truthful is important because it does make us go like, is it okay? Are you okay? Are you safe? So to create a safe workplace. The framework that we found in pandemics is, do you hear me? So you're going to want to say, hey, am I listening? Do people feel heard? Am I hearing their concerns, their genuine concerns? Do they know that I'm hearing them? And are you being listened to, your feedback of like, hey, this is what I need, and your boss is listening to that? Are you protecting me? So this could be personal protective equipment. It could be, hey, are you making sure you are paying your unemployment taxes in case I get laid off? All different ways of how am I protecting my staff and being able to share that. Preparing, so that idea of planning. Are we prepared? Can you tell me how we're prepared? Going ahead and coming up with a plan is a way to help with the preparedness. Supporting me means, hey, can you go ahead and if something bad happens, will you be there? How will you be there? And then caring for me is knowing that human resonance of being cared for definitely helps create a more supportive environment. I think I will post this here, up here, the resilience wheel that comes to different aspects of resilience. I know we're running out of time, so I want to pause here and allow for any questions to address directly because it's such a large topic.
Heather, on my screen, it's not full screen and I'm having trouble with the words. I'm seeing your whole
That better?
Thank you. Perfect.
Yeah. So, you know, it has so many different components here. We talked about the providing care and support. So even if you're unable to do some of the things that your employees would like you to do, just saying, I hear you, and this is why I don't have the budget for it. I wish I did. This, again, communicating is a key component. Providing meaningful participation opportunities, being part of a team. All of these are part of resilience. And then there are questions moving forward that when I work with people, we really spend some time thinking through in a safe way. Skip that one. Is what does this really mean to get through? What's your definition? What is it like to do this well? Even if there aren't positive outcomes, meaning you might have to let some of your staff go, you might have to pull back on their hours. How do you do it well? What does recovery actually look like? And then the possibility of emerging stronger. So just some questions to leave you with to ponder.
Is that the end of your material there? Okay.
Get up for
Okay.
discussion or questions.
So does anybody have any questions for Heather about what you're dealing with in terms of getting your staff or your organization feeling like they're moving through this thing productively?
Heather, on the slide that you put up and then removed, it said response to wearing masks.
Oh, yes.
I think that's
these are, and I know most of us on here are, I will share that, small, you know, have a smaller staff. These tend to be the issues. Sorry, give me 1 second to screen share again. Yeah, response to wearing masks. So this is causing a lot of stress. When people don't wear a mask, and then what part of this, whether it is other employees or customers that come in, it depends on what your clientele, how to deal with that, how to respond to that has been causing a lot of stress. And the idea of going to work and having to face that has been hard on a lot of people. So that was one of the, I'm trying to share the screen again so I can show that to you. Response to wearing masks, again, like I said, your staff and clients. This idea of working from home versus having to be in the office, there people are having different feelings about working from home. Some people don't feel safe going back. Other people are like, please let me back. I can't stay at home anymore. The working from home, hey, if I could do it from home and now you're saying I have to come in the office, what is it, that you don't trust me to work from home anymore? It can bring up a lot of things that you want to anticipate people's reaction to the transition from home to being in the office, depending on what type of work you do. If you have to, some places have the option, other work environments don't. You want to anticipate the continuity of operations. If you get sick, especially for small businesses, and you have staff, who is going to make what decisions? If your team gets sick, what do you have in place? The idea of fatigue, it's real, and it's going to get more and more, especially if as the school year starts, there's going to be more fatigue in the entire community. And then the idea of institutional betrayal, that happens more when we have organizations that don't take care of their people properly. One of the examples is kind of like not having enough protective equipment when you're working in a hospital. And that actually is a huge component of not just stress, but really disruptiveness in a work environment, which probably doesn't apply to most of us that are on the call right now.
Yeah, in terms of the response to wearing masks, because that's both workplace and social and everything, that has become such a hot button.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of stress around that particular aspect of it.
I think there's also been a lot of stress around people not sure that their job, their actual function that they serve, is appropriate for what's going on. I mean, Carol's a good example. She's our events coordinator. We're not having events, so she's had to do a pivot. I have a friend who does the attendance at school, at an elementary school. Well, they're not attending in person, so she's not even sure if her job is going to be in place, 3 months from now. So there can be a lot of uncertainty around that too. Like, where do I fit in the new reality, right?
Absolutely. And that's why, because you want to do what I'm calling that assessment, you want to get a pulse on what is happening and what are the nuances and the specifics. And then sometimes you're going to have to address them at the individual level based on the job position. Sometimes it's your entire organization, or if you work with kids and this uncertainty about transmission, but then you don't mind that, but then, in a way, and then you go home though to an elderly parent, how does that, that's a different experience for someone versus someone who might not go home to someone who's at risk or more at risk for getting really sick. So that's the thing, is there's so many nuances that you have to understand what's going on for your people, both individually and collectively, because the individual influences the collective and the collective influences what's going on for individual people.
Any other questions for Heather?
Yeah, Heather. So I know, while you're a boss and an employer, it's important to be compassionate and supportive and everything. Do you have any tips or anything we can do to also encourage our team members to also try and take on some of the ownership and responsibility of everything? Because sometimes, especially with the younger guys on the team, they they kind of bring you the problem, and it might not even be a professional problem right away, and just kind of here, solve this for me, instead of being I've taken these steps to try and solve it and I'm really stuck. Do you have any suggestions, especially with younger team members?
Yes, I would say getting involved with asking the right question from the start. So in that case, off the top of my head, and I'm happy to discuss more offline, is, okay, so let me be clear what the problem is, so they feel heard, and be like, so tell me, what have you already done? Right? Because then you're activating this accountability responsibility. Tell me what you have already done. And so you're kind of getting on that path without any judgment or demand as a starting point to the conversation. And then you might find out they actually did more than you know, or you realize they didn't. And then it's like, okay, so what are the top 2 things that come up for you that would be the next steps. And then seeing if you can actually walk them through the process is my recommendation. And then offer like, oh, you know what? You need that? I'm happy to fill out that piece of paperwork for you as your employer. That's no problem. Once I fill it out, then you can take it here. So how to, where it's appropriate and knowing where your boundary is and being clear about your boundary is, I'm willing to do this, and then this falls into your wheelhouse. And sometimes, we don't realize that people can't right now. It can be hard to motivate. So sometimes being able to say, you know what, let me take the first step for you is an act of kindness. And sometimes saying, I'm going to hand the responsibility back to you is the most compassionate thing. It's individual, but also staying authentic and not taking on too much where you're like, I'm becoming resentful, or I couldn't attend to it because I'm also running the business and I'd like to, but I couldn't. Understanding your own boundary and what works for you is an important part of the consideration.
Awesome, yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And then there's other places where we have to encourage, how to help people decompress and release some of this if people aren't taking care of themselves. Is a challenge to encourage self-care as well, which is tangential to what you were saying, is that, how do you say, hey, I see this, I'm here for you, and I need you to step up to the plate a little bit, or I want you to step up for your own well-being as well as possibly the needs of my company or organization.
Well, Heather, we're running out of time here. I've put your email in the chat so people can reach out to you if they have additional questions. I just want to thank you very much for doing this. I think this topic is so huge. We could probably spend an entire day talking about this, but I think the willingness of employers and team leaders to check in with their people to try to get ahead of some of the most common worries is really, really valuable. So thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Do you have a website that people can find you at?
So it doesn't have this information, but you can find transformationattheedge.com.
Okay, great. And they can also email you, and if they have questions or they want a copy of the
Please
slide
do.
or something like that. Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in, and I'm going to stop recording now. Thanks, Heather.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for a
Good to
wonderful
see you.